As you can see here on the front page of a People Daily, cost of edible oil inflated. And President directs head of civil service to write to EACC over claims that the CS or a CES, a state corporation CEO and state house official, colluded and added $7 per litre for commodity meant to lower cost of living. And the latest development is today that the graft agency, that is EACC, now is investigating Kenya National Trade Corporation over fraud and irregular tenders. And that is also bound to be one of the issues as well. Cooking oil manufacturers, the head of state had, through his own initiative, negotiated a contract with the cooking and manufacturing farms there. You can read the rest of the details there. It's not very visible from my end. But it says the head of state had, through his own initiative, negotiated a contract with the cooking oil manufacturers on understanding that this will bring down the cost of the 125,000 metric tons of edible oil, which was part of a strategy to tame the high cost of basic commodities. And so people took advantage of that, and that's why we have a probe. Where will this end? That is a question. And we've been talking about this as well. Bilo, maybe you want to comment on this because you are intimately familiar with what was really happening in this particular sector as well. So first we had denials that this is a squeaky clean deal. There is no area where people are having some jiggery pokery underhandings. But now there is a problem which is looming.
Yeah, I think we have discussed it in this on this forum many times in the last 6 months, this issue of the import of cooking oil by Kenya National Trading Corporation, and I think the chickens have come home to roost, as they say. I think there's a bit of a misreporting from what I'm seeing. The president did not negotiate with the manufacturers here. What he did was the opposite. In fact, despite the many appeals by the local manufacturers to engage the government so that they can discuss the issue of the cooking oil, what the government did was to allow people who are connected to government, and call them political cronies, the people who financed this administration in their campaigns, to import large quantities, 125,000 metric tons of cooking oil to KNTC. And then KNTC was to sell on to distributors and retailers in the country. What happened is that thing flopped in the sense that today KNTC is stuck with millions of jerrycans of cooking oil they are not able to sell for reasons that part of it is very poor quality, overpriced, because the price at which the people who imported sold to KNTC was inflated. In fact, the $7 mentioned there is not per liter, it's per jerrycan.
It's per jerrycan?
Yes. So, and this story was carried extensively, remember, in the media, until the media, there was a backlash. The media was accused of being prostitutes and so forth, and the president stood by his CS in that regard. It was all about this exposure. So I think, in my view, the loss is really much more than the 6 billion, because there's a loss to KNTC, which is going to be much more than this. Then there's a KRA that was denied revenue illegally, because the whole thing about importing finished goods under the South African Customs Management Act, that whole law was flouted, because that requires the South African community to approve any waiver, in that regard. But the government went ahead and bulldozed and gave a number of people. The list was tabled by the CS in Parliament, you remember. Include all sorts of people who are connected to government. So I think it was unfortunate. It did not achieve the objective, which was reduce the price, and so what happened is that the government lost. As we speak now, KNTC is stuck with this thing, and this was financed through LCs provided by Kenya Commercial Bank. It was in the papers, and Kenya Commercial Bank they got a loan facility from African Exim Bank, you remember, for all those duty-free goods. So the whole thing about the duty-free goods, the sugar, the cooking oil, the water, the wheat, the beans, everything was something that was designed to try and benefit. None of it has helped Kenyans to reduce the cost of food. You will know that very well. You remember the maize thing, the sugar one, Nothing. It's just people got deals, no duty, no VAT, nothing. You import, you sell the way you want to KNTC, and KNTC is a government institution, so they were paying prices that were negotiated with those suppliers, not related to the market. So I think it's unfortunate thing. They ended up grounding many companies who were manufacturers. Several manufacturing companies had to suspend their operations because they could not, sell when this thing came. But later, I think because of the quality of the product and the price at which they were trying to sell KNTC, they could not compete with the local manufacturers. So today we are stuck with this, and I think someone has to pay for this because it's huge amount of money. You remember, it was in the media, it's about $48 million worth of, because it is 125,000 metric tons, 7 million jerrycans, and each jerrycan was costing, in fact, much more than that, because each jerrycan was sold to KNTC at $30. It was in the news, $30, and there's 7 million. So it's costing over 200 million, but the deal, the 6 billion is what these people who supplied KNTC were benefiting.
6 billion.
This is the profit they were making. 6 billion shillings, $48 million. This is the profit they were making on the deal. So, but now KNTC is stuck. And I think this is something that I'm happy that the president is ordered an investigation, and I think Kenya Ethics and Anti-Corruption should find out what's going on.
So do you think the president spoke quite soon when these issues were being raised and he was standing by the CS?
He stood by the CS.
And now we can see him speaking differently.
He demonized the manufacturers, local manufacturers. He went on public TV twice to say, what are you manufacturing? You guys are just packaging things. You remember? And he told off manufacturers twice. And they told him, but we have 30 manufacturers who have invested over 100 billion, who have capacity to manufacture 2 million tons of crude palm oil annually. But that time the focus was to benefit these people. But I think, when the deal goes sour, then everyone is out of it. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And during the time as well, I don't know if we had the president of Indonesia here. Yeah, and there was also
some Mama Pia thing.
Yes, the bilateral talks about also setting up a palm edible oil farm here in the country as well. So could that also be adding in the greater scheme of things as far as that sector is concerned?
You see, there has been what the president said at the time was that, look, instead of importing the crude palm oil, why don't you grow the palm oil in this country and save the $1 billion he said that we spend on importing crude palm oil every year, which is a good idea. It's not a bad idea. Mm-hmm. And this is how the Indonesians came to see the possibility of growing. But the reality is that the technical committee of the ministry and the manufacturers and all of that had looked at this thing, even before that. The question is the suitability of the environment, the climate, and many other factors. Palm oil, as you know, the largest, 90% of the palm oil is Malaysia and Indonesia because of that environment. It requires completely a different environment from this one. But they did invite, and they did come with the Indonesian president, and they did visit Coast and parts of Western Kenya that the government said they can allocate some land for that purpose. Because Uganda, in Jinja area, it's got an area that, those islands around Entebbe that are suitable, and where Bitco and Wilma of Indonesia are already planting that thing. So the only other area is in equatorial Africa and western parts of Africa. But so whether or not the Indonesians will find the environment to be suitable and go ahead with the deal, but the government did invite them, and I think there is a plan to try and so that we have the value addition all the way from the planting up to the manufacturing in this country. But that's one of the things that they've been pushing.
So don't you think this really flies in the face of a Build Kenya or Buy Kenya, Build Kenya spirit? That since we have even no consultation, people who are within that particular sector, they're not consulted, and you're speaking condescendingly towards them. What does it do to that particular steamrolling of Buy Kenya, Build Kenya?
We are like on our panel, someone like Bilo who understands both the conceptual framework, but is also an industrialist and does many things. So he has real knowledge in this. Probably whatever consultation was done was inadequate. But let me put it this way. We were at a time of crisis, and the expectation of using imports as a public policy at a time of crisis of that nature is to bring in goods that to be cheaper than the domestic prices, to force the domestic prices to come down, and then respond therefore to the outcry that we had about excessive, very high cost of living. But instead, I think issues of bad governance, I would say, led to an import bill that was higher even than the domestic cost. Therefore, the net, you would expect, if all of it had entered if it had entered the market, and since there were these severe shortages, people would have initially at least been buying well above the market price they would have had, even without imports and so on. I would hope that they'll go to the genesis of this and fix it. For the president's defense of his CS, I think that's what you'd expect as a manager. The first line reaction you have can't be a condemnation if you are the boss. You have to defend until, let's put it this way, until facts prove otherwise. And I am happy in my mind that the president has acted correctly by, I'm sure he would be in favor of what EACC is doing to get to the bottom of this thing. Or probably he may have suspected, but maybe the things were not, the scale and scope may have shocked him when everything came to light. But in any case, going forward, I think it is a precedent that senior managers in the economy would have to be conscious that if you do something expecting that, well, it won't catch up with you, and so that would not be a good thing. And even if you're a CS, remember, and you're being misled by the managers of your institutions, I think you have a question that could catch up with you, or whatever hierarchy it is in this whole process, either institution or individual, that our governance system does catch up. So let's hope it gets down to the bottom of it, and that it becomes a lesson for not only for the edible oils or edible sector, but any other commodities, and many other commodities. Lastly, the issue of the palm oil, FAO has done studies over the years to demonstrate suitability. They found areas of Nyanza and Western as being suitable. I don't know what the acreage was, and I don't think it went beyond the scientific, the research side, with some multiplication, but not enough. They didn't go commercial. But if there is any potential in the region generally, I think they should exploit it to the extent they can, so at least we have some import substitution there. We may not match the Indonesia's levels at all, but if we have some potential, let us do that. Somehow we have this weakness of never pushing it to the logical end. The only people who copied Indonesia, although their climate probably is more suitable than East Africa, are the West Africans. Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, they have grown this for ages, but Cote d'Ivoire aggressively expanded their production to the point where it became the largest producers of the continent. During the days of Houphouët-Boigny, when he was there, he was visionary in many ways, and he disregarded some of the basic 101 economic principles, and realized that if we expand large enough, we'll have the scope and scale to be able to muddle through, and they did muddle through with the hindrances that normally stop people in the early. And he mobilized all institutions along the line, including into the export sector, and of course their foreign exchange arrangements to France were guaranteed, were negotiated, so they were predictable and so on. So it was an environment that's different from what we have now. But I think just going back on these issues of governance, I think that's what we should stick with on this one, and I hope that EACC is able to throw enough light to help come out with the lessons that will impact our public policy stance, because we are still in the middle of this crisis of risks of shortages and so on and so forth. It's not gone yet. So this is, for me, it's like an inquiry on the current issue. I mean, it's going to be a good one.
Mm-hmm. All right, so we start with, let me just hear from Professor then before I ask the next question.
It appears anytime there's a crisis in this country, we always follow what Winston Churchill once said: never waste a good crisis. So if there's a shortage of something, some people always come and make deals. And it is unfortunate that there's a crisis, shortage of something, but people are making money out of that. So on the contrary, everybody should be benefiting from lower prices, because that's a government effort to help people, which tells you that we are probably using the wrong approach, because I'm a firm believer that the market can do a lot of those things. palm oil is not something, cooking oil is not something very complicated. If we import drugs and so on, why not just open the market? That if anybody can import cooking oil, let him import. But we should also give first priority to those who are here, who are manufacturing that product, because it's much easier, you prop the economy, you create jobs, and so on. So I think the main issue we should be discussing here is why are we not letting the market work? And I have probably two examples of, I'm a frequent user of Nairobi-Nakuru route. And although the price of petrol has been going up, the price or the fare from Nairobi to Nakuru has not gone up substantially because there's a lot of competition. A lot of matatus ply that route. You can be trolled by a matatu going to Ebuya, a matatu going to Kisumu, a matatu going everywhere. So why don't we bring competition in every industry to make sure that prices go down? We know that anytime there's competition, prices go down. But when you bring in controls, like I have not been hearing of KNTC for a very long time.
Indeed.
Now it's very active. Why did it come back?
That's what I wanted to ask.
Well, what is the objective? And another example you can give is food in Nairobi is not as expensive as expected, because anybody who has food can bring it to Nairobi. And that brings competition, the price goes down. So the issue of government comes in. But I don't understand why we are letting the visible hand of the government trump the invisible hand of the market. We shouldn't.
Right, so the issue of KNTC and the resurgence of it, was it a special purpose vehicle for this particular scam to happen? Was it housing it?
No, you see, the point you raised about the market is critical. The government should let the market work, really. I mean, getting state corporations to start competing in supply of maize, of rice, of wheat, of oil, of this, of that, I don't think was. And you found a lot of outcry on the maize millers during that import thing. The same thing with the sugar. They had to shut down. Literally, all the sugar factories were all shut down because there's no cane, and people are busy importing. The oil, the same thing happened, and we asked, look, we have excess capacity, 2 million ton capacity. Our consumption is only 800,000. If there's an issue, this is not about shortage. This is not something grown here. So if there's something about how to reduce price, let us sit and discuss.
So the shortage was sort of a false flag.
There was no shortage of cooking. Cooking was not about shortage. It was just a deal of making money. I'm telling you, we have no factory operates at more than 40% capacity because we have excess production capacity. What they needed was to sit with them and find out how can we reduce the cost of production. What are the issues? Is it power? Is it the taxes? Because we pay a lot of taxes on import of crude, palm oil, in the same way that you pay taxes on wheat flours, on wheat when you import wheat, and so many things. So I think, but I think KNTC in this day and age, really in a government that is committed to market dynamics, it's misplaced completely, and it will be a risk that it can be used as a vehicle for corruption, really, because what happens in this case was KNTC was supposed to import these things. If they were to import directly from those countries, then we would not have this crisis on all this sugar, wheat, and all these things. But what was happening is that middlemen were contracted, and you saw the list when the CS was discussing in the Senate. He could not explain the competitiveness of the procurement process. How were these people selected to be the ones to supply KNTC? And his argument is that we are not covered. This KNTC is an independent thing. It's not under. It's not a state corporation. It's not bound by the procurement law. They can. It's a trading entity. They can do what they want. But the reality, that's why they're being investigated now, is that this is a state corporation, 100% owned by government. They must comply with the rules of the procurement procedures, procurement and disposal procedures. So
in a way, it was misleading the committee.
Yes, of course, and I think this is it's good that these things are being investigated so that we don't go ahead with this kind of things really. And today, we don't, because clearly it has failed. That whole deal about duty free import, we think, did not significantly help on the trade, on the price stabilization, objective of the government. It did not achieve. So maybe then they needed to go back, like the maize. They have decided to go back to the fertilizer and look at the inputs rather than focus on the same thing that they avoided the subsidies on oil and petroleum and so forth. So I think that this thing is, KNTC is not going to work. And there's a lot of things that are being investigated
So what happens to the dead stock? So we have all these volumes that they are just stashed away, you say, or also they are of poor quality. What happens?
Well, I think they have to find a way. They have to find a way of disposing it off. You know, and I don't think there are many ways of dealing with it. Probably they have to engage manufacturers, they probably have to engage distributors and find a way in which they can dispose of this thing. But you know, and if the quality is not good, then it means it has to be decanted, it has to be redone. You can't just import, you know, something without looking at standards and dump it into the market. You can't, and this is why they have to find a way. I think the government has to find a solution, because this is a huge amount of money. It's hundreds of millions of dollars. Yeah.
So if you find the CS is culpable, do you expect the heads to roll?
I guess that anybody culpable, heads would roll, or there'll be some sort of what would you say, action, in a reaction. Let's put it that way, because there's an action already. But just what it would be, I think, would depend on the nature of the malfeasance that is found, if any. I'm sure there will be some, just which, who, where. And as you know, in many ways, it is those, I mean, if there's a robbery somewhere and people have run away, police come and you're loitering around, and you're the first one to find, they'll want to talk to you and find out what you know and so on. So there may be innocent people also drawn into it. But I think, be it as it may, the very fact that there is action on it, I think for me is really a powerful thing.
It is unlikely that action will be taken on those people, because they are all people connected. Very senior people, people are very connected to the people in power. I mean, the people who are given, you saw that list table in the Senate, the people and the CS himself and all the people, these are all people. So I don't see, really, there is a good PR to order investigation.
So this is good PR, exercise
what
futility.
happens, whether these people will end up in court is a different matter.
Okay.
Hopefully we'll be here in a year's time.
At least in 1 year's time, we'll have forgotten.
We'll find out what has happened.
But I think we should not start. Kenya has always been a free market economy. We should not start lowering that back. Because I remember when I was a young boy seeing a lot of shortages of basic commodities in shops and so on, because the prices were controlled. There was a lot of regulations on supply and demand and so on. So let the market work. That has always been my rallying cry.
Let the market work. All right. I wanted just also to probe the issue of what we had from a KPMG lately regarding Tanzania now overtaking Kenya in terms of the hub of being the investment preference for many CEOs that they were questioned, or the survey was taken. The preference is more conducive environment is happening in Tanzania right now. And also we can see lately now we have the shipping industry here trying to catch up, because what is happening in Tanzania also, they have to bring down their prices so that they can actually keep up with the competition. But why have we lost it, especially in this particular epoch of time?
Yeah, first of all, I don't worry much about Tanzania getting an edge here, getting an edge there. They're coming from a low point. It was a hostile environment for a long time because of ideology and so on. They're opening up, and investors are eager to test the market, exploit the market and so on. And let's see the long-term reaction of Tanzanians to an aggressive capitalist invasion of their country. They had difficulties with the Kenyans over the years, for example, simply because we were from this man-eat man society as they saw it. So I don't think in the long term, the more efficient, the better governance, the lower rates and so on, I think will prevail. You can see already, it didn't look like Mombasa had, the port of Mombasa had potential to lower costs. It didn't look like, it's like last time we visited, this year I've been there twice, they would tell us about, how efficiently the port is working, blah, blah, blah. But now that Dubai World or something?
DP World.
Yes, DP World has gone into that, and they foresee stiff competition. It looks like there's room to lower costs. And that's what market forces, in a sense, now would do, even from a parastatal like KPA. So I think that Kenya will stand up to it. Kenya has the human capacity to do it. I think what really lets down Kenya occasionally is the dynamics of policy making that sometimes gets compromised along the line. But I think we are going to see this as an existential danger, and I will rise up to it. It's I was going to use an example. I didn't get a better example, but I don't think I can use that on public TV. I just want to say that Tanzania is a place that's relatively less discovered. Nobody has had a chance to, frizzle their fingers all over the place to see what it is they're dealing with. And they're in the process of exploration. Kenya has gone through that for a long time. So I really think that we can be up to it. It will wake us up, hopefully, and we'll become a more efficient economy, driven by the existential fear that will come from Tanzania.
Mm-hmm. But when you're talking about existential threats, where we have DP World almost managing the entire belt of the Africa depots, and maybe some without as well. What is the intrinsic risk when we have such critical infrastructure being managed by one DP World, when it comes to also the monopolistic venture that they are? What are some of the risks that we will be facing?
Do you want me to go first, or?
Yeah, I'm asking you.
Let's move on to
I like this debate about Tanzania because I was in Tanzania last year. I visited the port of Dar, and one of the things that we did was to go to. They have built a very tall tower, and you go to the highest level, and you have a very good view of the port. And I can tell you, there's a lot of activities going on in Tanzania. Not only has the port been dredged, but there is the SGR that is coming from Dar es Salaam going to the interior. So Tanzania is doing very well in terms of attracting investment. But when we talk about Tanzania as Kenya, there's something we forget. And I wrote 10 years ago that Tanzania will one day overtake Kenya economically for a very simple reason. Mm-hmm. Tanzania's biggest problem now is economic. They have sorted the problem of nationhood. So wherever you meet Tanzanians, whether in Tanzania or anywhere in the world, they feel as Tanzanians. Now when I meet Kenyans today and they ask me, what is your name? I tell them my name is Iraqi. You can guess the next question. Tanzania don't have that. So because of that nationalism, let me say nationalism, because of being forged into a country, it will be easier to solve their economic problems. Let's also forget that, as my colleague has said, it is true Tanzania is unexplored. It's a very rich country. I was looking at simple statistics. Kenya has a coastline of 536 kilometers. The last time I checked, Tanzania has about 1424 kilometers, about 3 times our coastline. And one of the richest areas to think about is the coastline. So Tanzania has a lot of agricultural land. It has a lot of minerals. So by extension, a lot of people will be attracted to that country. We don't have such resources in this country. So people always go where there are opportunities, and they are there in Tanzania. And I think the other attraction that nobody want to say loudly is Tanzania is a more welcoming country. Anytime I go to Tanzania, I feel very much at home. I want to add myself one more day because people are humble. People greet you on the lift. People greet you you feel you're at home. Here, when I greet Kenyans in a lift, they say, pardon. They don't expect to be greeted. So I think culturally Tanzania is a more welcoming place, and if they can leverage on that, they'll bring a lot of investors.
Mm-hmm. The risk part of it being, I know that's the bit of Tanzania.
Well, the risk of DP managing out of ports, that's definitely a risk. You cannot have one company managing all the ports. So maybe what we need to do is to have diversity of people to manage our ports. But the bigger question is, 60 years after independence, why can't we manage ports? It's not rocket science. What is DP doing that we can't do? So I think we should not be talking about DP managing our ports, but us managing ports. Our universities are charging management specialists every year. And I believe our graduates are good enough to manage ports. They've been managing banks and other big institutions. Why can't they manage the port?
Maybe we need a curriculum on managing the ports as well.
The issue of...
It's boiling to be a science.
The issue of managing ports is similar to the issue of it's what drives privatization of state corporations. It's about the chronic inefficiencies, the mismanagement and corruption in public institutions that have made them inefficient, poor performance and not profitable and so forth. So I think this is the same thing that drives the performance, the privatization of ports. And DP World, it's alongside China, is one of the biggest companies that manage ports in the world.
Yes.
But I remember about 25 years ago, the first time we wanted to a company to run Mombasa port, Singapore was leading, and followed by Japan. At that time, DP was not even in the list. Mm-hmm. And we then, it was the time of Kibaki, I think we then pulled back and said no. People didn't want that idea of another company. But DP World runs ports in over 40 countries. I think probably after China owns almost 100 ports in almost 40-50 countries. So there are many. Singapore companies, the same thing they manage. So management of ports is not a problem. The issue is the way it's done, that transparency. And even in Tanzania, the issue was on the transparency. You simply see government officers signing a deal with another entity from outside, and nobody knows what are the terms. We have concession at this port for 50 years, 30 years to DP World, and we don't know the terms. So I think what is important is that transparency, that process of getting the oversight institutions like Parliament, so that we get a deal. But critically, the most important thing is that I don't see major inherent risks. For example, the employees will still be maintained, because I don't think you will sign on to such things where they will get rid of our employees and bring Chinese employees to come and work at the port. But employees will be retained. A certain amount of profit will be taken by them. Most of the time, they'll take about 30-40% of the profits and probably leave about 60% for the. What else is important is really on getting the ports to work efficiently and to be competitive and to invest and expand it, because that investment and expansion also must be critical a component, because where government cannot, for example, put $1 billion, these people can be told one of the requirements is you put $1 billion to expand the number of berths in a port, the connectivity with the rail and other whatever. So I think it's not a bad thing, but the way it's done is where the question is.
Mm-hmm. Right. I wanted just to pick up also the issue of let's talk about now the dollar and the sentiments that are coming from the central bank governor that our shilling is overvalued. Coming from such an institution, I wonder what sort of sentiments and shock it has sent in the market, because for the longest time we thought our shilling was doing good, and when we hear that is overvalued and coming from the central governor, what does that really mean? Just to put it in context so that Kenyans will understand, our shilling is overvalued, and you can see it's on a free fall as it is right now, and the inflation is eating away also on our shilling. Looking at what we have on the business daily today, 1,000 shillings. Now it looks like the value of it is 850 in reality. And they've given a very good breakdown here that if you're earning 100,000 shillings, you have 10,380 less. Right? That's a huge amount of money when you're talking about the inflation as well. But when we come from those sentiments coming from the governor of central bank, what does it really portend?
Will you go first?
Okay.
No, I don't know.
Okay. All right. I think I think it's an admission. First, I think it points to an admission by the central bank that there is a challenge, there is a crisis regarding the forex market, because two aspects of it. One, the shillings is depreciating very fast. Yesterday and the day before, we have been buying at 157 for inputs.
157 now.
Yeah, for those people importing, that's the price at which we are buying. The second aspect of it is, and I think I'm sure it will be probably 160 by next week. But the second thing, which again is more significant, is availability. I mean, we spent hours trying to raise sufficient dollars to import, raw materials. It's very difficult to get. because the importers who have the dollars do not want to sell because they also want to keep it for their own use. And because of the rates are also falling, nobody wants to keep his money in shillings. So I think the government has been trying to look for reasons why this is happening. And so I look at that explanation by Mr. Kamau Thuge as an attempt to try and provide some explanation on why they're not able to stop the shilling from sliding further. And so he says the reason is because this thing is overvalued. This is an argument IMF has been banding around for years, that, you know, and they do that to many countries in Africa and so forth. And when people complain about, you know, they say your shilling is overvalued. And they look at it in the context of your imports, you know, your trading account, is it in surplus, is it in deficit, is it because your exports are lower? And they say, you know, your shilling is overvalued, and you know, it should find. And they've been saying this from the time Uhuru came to power. I remember they've been saying your shilling is overvalued, and so they'll tell you, you know, your central bank is, every time the shilling is losing value, central bank has been intervening in the market to try and prop up the shilling and so forth. And so they have been giving that argument. So I think the reality, however, is that today's depreciation of our shilling has little to do with that argument. It has more to do with the debt problem, that we are stuck with, you know, billions of dollars that we have to service every year, and the government is the single largest user of forex that we have in payment of the loans, which are denominated in forex. I think that is the biggest risk, and that's where our money is going. Of course, the second is that after Corona, the cost of imports went up significantly, including petroleum, including the cooking oil, including many other products. Actually, the cost went up significantly for whatever reasons, and since then our import bill has gone up, and so the demand for dollars has increased substantially. I'll give you an example for the cooking oil we are in. Before April 2020, we were buying a ton of crude at around $500. By the time the war started in Ukraine, it was $2,200. 5 times almost, over 5 times. And so imagine how much dollars you require to import the same quantity of, and this happened now to literally everything over the last couple of years, over 2-3 years. So the demand on import also increased substantially. And lastly, I think also our exports have not been increasing. You know, the tea, the coffee, the traditional things, the horticulture. I mean, we're not doing much. Tourism was collapsed during the time of Corona. You know, most of the tourism now is local. So I think the inflows we've been relying on are the diaspora inflows and so forth, conference tourism and kitu kidogo. But otherwise, I think, so those are the reasons why there is a shortage. And then the Njoroge, I have said in this forum so many times, the former governor also screwed up the whole thing when he did away with the interbank market and told everybody, you know, the shilling is available, and you remember the way he dismissed manufacturers and importers for almost 3, 4, 5 years. So I think that, but the fact remains, it is all about the debt, and the government doesn't want to come out and tell you, yes, that's why we are stuck with this shortage. We have always survived before this debt crisis came, when our imports and exports always covered our requirements for imports.
And that debt has now crossed over to 1.5 trillion shillings, according to the Kenya World Bank.
Thank you.
Let
me pick up where Bill has ended. Essentially, the value of the currency is the balance between demand and supply. You can fix an exchange rate you want if you're able to back it up. If you had such a stock of dollars that was sitting somewhere that you could push into the market and lower you can get it to any point where you want it to be, depending on how much you can actually back that up. But I think that the management of the economy needs to be public. The previous governor, a very bright fellow, I think somehow they didn't do enough sharing of information. This comment about our valuation has been around, as Bill has said. And Njoroge said so in some of the forums, softly, quietly, as if to say so publicly would scare the markets and so on and so forth. I think Kamau, being a new governor, is trying to say this is where we are and expect some more adjustment in the exchange rate. going forward. Just how far it will go. Even if they say it's completely free market, you won't allow a free fall to any level. They must be thinking about at what point do we sort of dig in and slow it down, because you can slow down.
But that's what they've indicated, that we've just left it to the vagaries of the market. It's a free fall.
Yeah, that's what they've said. But I'm sure that they have a figure. They have a figure in mind to allow it to settle somewhere. They may not be able to say that publicly, but they must have that figure. They realize, and you can see. I say that the evidence that is normally hidden in this public parlance, where he's saying, "Oh, we're expecting inflows." I think he said, I don't know how many hundreds of millions of dollars from IMF if they agree after next week, more by about the spring, April. World Bank is coming in another $750 million. Is implying that there are going to be significant inflows, and that although it's a free market thing, the free fall won't be totally free, because as those inflows come in, they will backstop that fall, or slow it down, or perhaps even reverse it, help to slow it and reverse. Although reversing it will not occur until our export picks up, our export economy, activity picks up sufficiently to bring in the supplies that we also need on a sustained basis. In the old days, the old way currencies changed hands in our countries was when there was what we used to call devaluation. And that was an ugly word, when you said devaluation, a government was overthrown. Then they discovered that, oops, the market can actually change those values without anybody complaining, and so on. So here we are. We are devaluing the currency quite substantially, using market forces. But within the market forces, you can influence what that free fall will be. And I think Amao has said, I believe if I'm right, you follow this better than I do, that he's reinstating the interbank market.
Which was done away by Njoroge.
Njoroge, yes. I think they might have, I don't know, I don't want to guess Njoroge's reasons, but Kamao's reasons are that if you do that, you allow those that have some cash, because of a good rate, they'll release it on the market, and those who need it will take it, and so on. So it won't always be expected the government to be the one that it, borrows to infuse in the stocks of foreign currency, of dollars in this case, that we want. And I think we must put pressure on our governance systems, central bank, and in some ways the Minister of Finance also, in terms of the policies they pursue and what incentives they provide to exporters particularly, and what incentives they provide to unnecessary imports. By unnecessary, I mean in times of crisis, you want to import more intermediate goods that are used to produce other goods, rather than luxury consumption, for example. So you can be discriminative in discouraging luxury consumption while facilitating intermediate goods that are going to be used for final products that improve exports, for example, and so on. So we need, I think, public participation. Kenya now is in a position to do that. Must put more pressure on them to speak out. On this forum, I said several times that we were going through this crisis after the last election. And the big managers in the economy were not speaking. The central bank governor was mum. I guess he was going to leave, so he probably didn't care too much. The finance person was completely mum. They never made any public statements. And I'm glad that Kamau Thuge is headed towards being able to explain what it is that he says is happening, which I think is an opportunity for people to comment in, and so we know where we're kind of headed. When you read his speech, as I conclude, a lot of it was in economic jargon. They were coded statements.
Your coded statements.
When he addressed the committee, the National Assembly Committee on Finance and Planning, and I asked myself, now, how many people will follow what he's actually saying here? He didn't quite come out. He gives statements which are subject to enormous interpretation, require a lot of knowledge to be able to accommodate it and so on. And that's what economists, when they use their jargon, do. They don't communicate the things clearly.
So you won't really question, because it sounds very esoterical. It flies way over your head.
Yeah, because the committee may not. Committee has experts. That's a good thing with the parliamentary committee, who normally would, if they were allowed to question instantly on behalf of the members, that will also be a very good thing. But in advance, they provide questions and answers to illustrate what it is that might be said, because they know what the issues are, so they alert the other members. But I hope that he'll come back. They should call him back often, not once in 3 months, no, perhaps every other week, because there are things happening continuously, so that he can say where they're heading. That is forum for letting the world know, plus what his statements are to the Monetary and Policy Committee, however that comes out. But they must be out in the public domain, so we know what they are doing. If not, we will have simply to follow blindly wherever it lands and so on. The debt question, very important.
Indeed.
Yes, that question. 3 years ago, in 2020, I published a bill on debt management. I made some proposals in that bill. But the one thing we noticed, that when the first SGR payment, principal and interest, came, they have this arrangement where you put money out in an escrow account to build up to the actual installment when you pay. It became, government was so desperate. I think they were collecting forex from everywhere that they could find it. They were cutting back expenditures on budget and agreed items to focus on accumulating forex by all means possible. That meant that the installment was heavy in relation to our cash flow. And everybody was denying. Governments don't accept that kind of thing. So Bilo is right that the issue of focusing on having a sustainable debt level is very, very important. So we can do all these things and continue with life. You can't walk on the street and say, no, I'm very broke this month because, I bought a car on loan and now my installment has come and I can't do this. My child is not going to go to school next week because I've run. No, then it means you are borrowing unsustainably. So, and I think that's something that we must begin to address.
Indeed. And when we've reached that particular 1.5 trillion shillings and we have a budget of 3 trillion shillings, and given now the fluctuation of the shilling to the dollar, will it inch up going to even a whole budget, so to speak?
Because I think we were using, first in relation to revenue, I think we were spending 2 years ago maybe 73 shillings of all the amount of on the revenue collected was going on to debt payment. That means everything else, defense, health, education, everything else is squeezed in the balance, and so on. That was not, you can't survive like that, no.
All right.
This is a very interesting debate. First, let's go back to your headline about inflation. I noted recently that the petrol station where I normally go and take petrol, now the attendants are calling me by name. They didn't know me because I come so frequent, and now they know me. So they greet me by name, which is very interesting. Let's go back.
Discount.
Yes, I'm often there. Now, this issue of what the central bank said, and it is true that central bank governors are very close to judges. You never know exactly what they are saying. People are left asking what they said. But I was surprised that the CBK governor could say what he said. But with the hindsight, it's not surprising. He was simply preparing Kenya for higher prices. Remember Kuria saying the same, prepare for higher oil prices. So what Kamau
10 shillings almost every month.
Yeah, so what probably Governor Kamau was saying is, the sharing is depreciating. You must be ready for the consequences. And it is one of the things that I find very strange in the new government. They are too open. You remember the Moi Kibaki government, who never used to be that open in terms of what is happening. But maybe that's the new paradigm. My observation is that if the sharing depreciates, the price of imports will go up. And of course, inflation will go up. But I think what they are not saying indirectly, and my colleagues have said it directly here, is, and that's my big concern, is if the sharing depreciates and the dollar appreciates, then your debt becomes more expensive. And maybe that's why one MP, I don't remember his name, was saying we want to come up with a law to stop Kenyans from holding dollars. I don't know, we don't hold, I don't know, reasonable amount of dollars. I don't know how they are going to implement that. But we are not also being sincere. I also suspect that by having the shilling depreciate, the dollar will become very pricey. So maybe if you are holding some dollars, you might take it to the market, hoping that is going to happen, because people might wait for it to wait to 200 instead of bringing it to the market at 180. So it's a risky venture. But finally, let's accept that one reason why the dollar shilling is depreciating is not just because it is undervalued. I think we still have not settled economically after we won the polls. There are still a lot of economic folks, there are a lot of economic policies that are not constant, that are not yet being settled. For example, should we be a market economy or should we be a regulated economy? Should we face east or should we face west? Should we use subsidies or not subsidies? So I think our policies are a bit they are a bit in a state of flux. And investors and entrepreneurs and other stakeholders in this country are not sure about the direction we are taking. And maybe that's why they are holding dollars, because they are not very sure about tomorrow. That's why you go to the market, you float a board, it is undersubscribed. So let's build some confidence in the economy, and we are going to start slowly sorting some of these economic issues.
Mm-hmm. One of the reasons why people are holding dollars, forget what the government is saying. Of course, one is the one we mentioned earlier, because if you are an exporter for tea and you got your money, you would want to keep your dollars because of your other import requirements. But the other major reason is because people are holding on to the dollars because of the central bank rules, regulations to the bank, that the bank can only, that dual rate policy that Njoroge introduced, which is still there, by the way. Although the president, they have scrapped it, still there. Central bank today will publish. You've seen, their rate is officially at 150. Yes. But if you walk to any bank, they'll sell it to you at 157, 156, 160. That dual rate policy is encouraged a lot of people to keep their money, because the bank will tell you we can only buy at 150. That's the rule from central bank. There's no bank. If you are an exporter and you have earned some $1 million, you're a tea exporter, it's in your bank account in Barclays, you cannot sell to the bank at other than the CPK rate of 150. But that bank will sell to me as an importer who wants to buy at 157. So the bank makes it 7 shillings, 10 shillings.
Why can't it be streamlined? I mean,
that is where the issue is. The government.
That sounds criminal.
That's the argument we have made for months under Njoroge, that look, why do you have this dual rate policy? And they've been rubbishing off everybody. But that's where the issue is. Allow this thing to be
market.
The reason why is because of the debt. They allow that 157.
Yeah.
Their debt automatically increases by 7 shillings, external debt. They'll go into another 3, 4, 500 billion more to pay. That's the only reason. So it's all about government and that selfish attempt to try and keep their debts level low. That's the main thing that is driving all this chaos. In the process, what has happened? Kenyans are suffering because everything being imported, the raw material, is costing much more because we're buying it because of the cost of the dollar. Yes, and that is passed on to the production cost. So the cost of production becomes more, the country's competitiveness is lost, the cost of living situation is getting worse. And I think there's a bigger effect on the economy that is more significant than what they are going to repay in the loans. I think they really need to look at this thing more critically.
All right. Yeah, I was surprised on that, a very quick one. The governor said that he had written, I was going to write to the banks on these issues of these margins, these differential rates. And I said, what? Why would he be writing these banks? Central bank governor is a very powerful person.
Yeah, he's a regulator.
You can call them together in less than an hour. They'll be sitting physically in front of him. But the reasons are that there are more profound reasons that he also knows. He knows this very well, and the bill is mentioned, one key one. That if you allow the operations to move to the higher margin, you have increased your debt repayment.
He's a gatekeeper for the treasury. That's the bottom line.
Indeed. All right. We want to take a short break right now. When we circle back, we look at this editorial cartoon as well. Taxes. You can see how that cow has been milked so far, but KRA has not yet even hit that target as we know it right now. Slap, we haven't met our collection target yet, and we can see them milking every which way. All right. Even now, we know workers in Nairobi will not be allowed. There is a 5% increase that we have the Kenya Roads Board trying to slap up the taxpayers with 5 more shilling to the already 200.